John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. Tonight, you're going to hear from the two candidates running for Arizona Attorney General. The AG is the chief legal officer of the state. Democrat Kris Mayes will join me in the second half of the program. But first, Republican Abe Hamadeh. He is an Army intelligence officer who previously worked as a prosecutor in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Abe Hamadeh joins me now. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Who the heck is Abe Hamadeh? I mean, a year ago, nobody, I don't mean to be disrespectful, they didn't know who you were.
No, I know that's absolutely a good question because you're right. A year ago, I had not announced my candidacy. I got back from serving overseas with the United States Army. I was on a 14-month-long deployment to Saudi Arabia. So when I got back here in September of 2021, in many ways, I'm just not happy with the direction of our state and country right now. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring and, announced November 1st of last year. And this is what's so unusual right now. There's a lot of political outsiders joining the political arena. So I think that's a big benefit. I have a new perspective I'm going to bring into the office.
You're 31 years old?
Yes.
What's your experience level? You were in the county attorney's office for 4 years?
Yes, that's right.
What kinds of cases were you trying?
All sorts of cases. The greatest thing about Arizona and the county attorney's office, they really throw you in there. And I think that's been a testament how well I've campaigned. I mean, when you're trying to argue a case in front of a jury or a judge and, actually having victims that you're responsible for, it's a different level of legal expertise. So being a lawyer in that realm was very useful for this office, but also my military background. When I was overseas for 14 months, I was interacting with foreign governments, the State Department, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, dealing with a complex relationship with the foreign government. So I think it really helped me on this race, and it will when I take office as well.
The courts right now are hashing out this abortion law confusion in Arizona. But what is your position on abortion? I want to give you an opportunity to articulate it.
Well, abortion's a complicated issue, John. I think we have to understand that obviously, as a prosecutor, one of the first things you do is we want to protect women and victims, right? But if you're looking at the job of the Attorney General is to enforce the law. You shouldn't bring your personal beliefs into that role too often. So I think what you have to understand is this confusion with these two laws is important to recognize what is the intent of the legislature. You look at the text. So, I agree with General Brnovich's position right now that you enforce the law that is on the books, and currently it has to be litigated all the way up. But if the legislature wants that law changed, they have that ability to, but I shouldn't bring my personal beliefs into that office.
It strikes me that they kind of made their wishes known. The 15-week ban, that's what they wanted to supersede once Roe v. Wade, if it were overturned, which it was. Paul Bender was on ASU constitutional law professor last week. He said that will be the law. That's what the legislature intended. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think if you look at the legislature, and I agree with what Brnovich's position is on it, if you read the text of that 15-week restriction, which is a reasonable restriction, by the way, the 15-week, most abortions occur prior to 15 weeks, almost 97%. But the text read at the end, it said if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the current laws remain intact. So, it's not about my personal beliefs, it's what the legislature wants. So they're the ones directly closest to the people, and they're the ones who are actually voting on bills.
On efforts around the country to defund police, which is sometimes a loaded term because advocates of this say, we're not trying to just gut police, we're trying to allocate resources, move them around, bring in more social workers, for instance, to assist the cops in mental health crisis cases that they're dealing with, whatever the deal, under the umbrella of defund the police. You've railed about this. You hate this idea. You think it's been bad for the country.
It has been, and I think they try to gaslight us, John, by trying to say that we're not defunding the police, we want to reallocate resources. It's not true. They said we wanted to abolish ICE back in the day as well. So, I'm proud to be endorsed by every single law enforcement organization in Arizona because they know I'll have the backs of the police. I was at Scottsdale Fashion Square 2 years ago when the whole BLM riots were happening. And
you were there?
I was there. I was right outside of it, right at the waterfront. And to witness what was going on and to see our politicians respond by changing the profile photos to a black square, that was unacceptable because I get thanked for my military service all the time, John, but we need to be thanking our men and women who wear that blue uniform every single day for going to the streets of war.
How does the AG, how would your policy affect that whole debate? What could you really do as AG?
Well, I think if you witnessed the press conference that Carrie Lake and I had the other week, where we were endorsed by the police organizations and we were getting questions by the media about whether law enforcement has a racism problem. You know, combating that narrative is, I think, really critical for that. But obviously, at the AG's office, I have 60 to 70 investigators who work underneath me, but also I'm dealing with law enforcement agencies all the time. But, you know, knowing that I'm going to be standing up for our men and women who wear that blue uniform is really critical for them to do their job.
Let me ask you about the 2020 election briefly. As AG, if you were AG in 2020, would there have been, or would it have been appropriate for you to, as AG, have weighed in on that election and tried anything to stop it?
Well, I think we have to understand, I wasn't here during the 2020 election, John. I was serving overseas, and I voted by email overseas, actually. But I think we have to understand, Arizonans want free, fair, and competent elections, John.
Do you think we don't have those?
Well, I think if you just saw what we witnessed in August in the primary, I mean, we had Pinal County having run out of ballots for Republican voters. That's unacceptable. In the private sector,
but running out of ballots isn't fraud necessarily.
Well, that could effectuate an outcome.
It could. It could affect an outcome.
I don't think we should tolerate incompetence in our elections, John. So, you know, looking at what we're going to do going forward, I want to expand the election integrity unit's office. You know, I recognize more than most how important our democracy is. I've actually sworn to defend it as an Army Reserve intelligence officer overseas. So, you know, it's offensive for people to somehow suggest now that, you know, we are a threat to democracy. I mean, here I am I've given my life, I protected it. So this is where we have to understand. And having confidence in our elections is a good thing. And making sure that what happens in Pinal County doesn't happen again, because it disenfranchises
But
people.
nothing you would do as Attorney General to stop 2020. You would not have tried to step in and halt the result.
I think what we have to understand is that if there was an investigation, just like, or for instance, there's litigation pending, just like what happened in 2000 versus Bush v. Gore.
I want you to react to a tweet from April 6th. To my message to those who worked to rob President Trump in the rigged 2020 election, your day of reckoning is coming.
Yeah.
When I take office, January 23, #PerpWalks.
Yeah.
Who are we talking about here?
Anybody who commits fraud, anybody who commits election fraud. But honestly, when you look at what's going on, John, you know, it's okay to say that there was a lot of shenanigans that happened. I mean, if you see what happened, you just had Mark Zuckerberg the other week say that he actually worked with the FBI to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story. I mean, there's election officials who were changing the rules in the middle of the game, and I think that's unacceptable. But you know, we really have to make sure we're focusing on elections, because so many Americans and Arizonans don't have confidence.
You mentioned big tech. You have talked about fighting back about the insanity, as you call it, of big tech.
Yeah.
What does that mean in terms of policy as an Attorney General? How could you rein in or alter the trajectory of big tech?
The current Attorney General just won a huge lawsuit against Google. He won an $85 million lawsuit against Google because, you know, supposedly they were tracking your location even if you requested for them not to track it. So that's what I mean. I tell folks, this is unusual times that we're living in, John. You know, it's not we're just fighting back against big government anymore, but we have to fight back against big tech or big business who can be as tyrannical as government. But I want to protect consumers, and that's exactly what the current administration just did by winning that lawsuit against Google.
Let me ask you about red flag laws. You have these are red flag laws are to try to ostensibly stop troubled individuals, mentally deranged or ill people with homicidal intent from buying firearms. You oppose those laws. Tell me why.
Well, if you look at where they've been enacted, I mean, in New York, they've been enacted for a while, and it's not stopping gun violence. So I think right now we have to understand the culture when you talk about defunding the police. It's reestablishing that idea there's consequences for actions, right? So by removing your Second Amendment right, or, you know, having that due process violated, I don't think it's appropriate. I intend to fully support our Second Amendment rights, but we have to go back to getting the criminals off the streets. This whole defund the police movement is really detrimental right now to our society.
You've talked a lot as well about securing the border, saying that you will declare an invasion at the southern border and declare drug cartels terrorist organizations.
That's right.
If you become Attorney General. How would that work on the ground?
So currently, AG Brnovich has said that there is an invasion going on our southern border, actually. And then you just saw Governor Greg Abbott of Texas now declare the cartels as terrorist organizations. So here in Arizona, we have that ability to declare cartels as terrorist organizations under Arizona.
What does that
State.
allow you to do?
It allows us to have enhanced sentencing guidelines on them. So instead of just getting 5 years in prison, for instance, for drug smuggling, with that enhancement of them being a terrorist and that classification, they would be getting 10 years or 15 years. So it's an enhancement for that. But it also allows us to seize their assets differently, too. So
while we talk about the border, I have to ask you about this. You're very tough and bullish on the border. You want it secure.
Right.
How does that square with your own family experience? Your family, immigration struggles. 1989, your father overstayed his visa from Syria. It was a 6-month visa. He overstayed it. Given the policy of the former President Trump, who endorses you, that probably would have been expulsion. And your father was asked to leave the country.
Well, I would say, I love my father, and he's a proud American citizen. It led me to serving the military, led me to public service by being a prosecutor. But, I want to highlight that, overstaying your visa, Melania Trump, they try to throw this at her too. It's a little different than what's going down at the southern border, where we're having unvetted
Is it different, though?
Completely different. And I say that because there's unvetted people who are coming across. We have no idea where they're coming from. A lot of them have actually been on the terror watch list, John. And that's what I was just down at the border the other week, and you're seeing people from every single walks of life. Of course people are coming to the United States because this is the best country on the face of the earth. But we're a nation of laws, so we have to make sure that they're actually enforced.
One more thing before we let you go. Chief difference between you and your opponent?
Oh, many, but she has said that she wants to focus on environmentalism, reproductive rights, and voting access. I want to focus on securing our border, the fentanyl crisis that's ravaging our communities. I want to focus on this rising crime in our streets, and I want to focus pushing back the Biden administration. But the key difference is my opponent has never practiced law. And in fact, her top campaign consultant has said she's equated this by saying that all law enforcement equals killing black people. That's unacceptable to be the top law enforcement officer in the state. So as Attorney General, I'm going to get tough on crime, I'm going to get tough on the border, but our country's not headed in the right direction, especially under this Biden administration. As Attorney General, I have the ability to protect Arizona. That's exactly what I'll do.
Abe Hamadeh, Republican candidate for Attorney General of the great state of Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate it. Back on Newsmaker Saturday with the Democratic candidate for Arizona Attorney General. Kris Mayes was born and raised in Prescott, a former reporter for the Arizona Republic, former aide to Governor Janet Napolitano, who appointed her to the Corporation Commission. She served there for 7 years, most recently a professor of ASU's Global School of Sustainability. Kris Mayes is our guest on Newsmaker Saturday. Great to see you.
Good to see you too, John. Good to be back.
So what in your background now prepares you to be Attorney General?
So, as you know, John, I served 2 terms on the Arizona Corporation Commission and wound up as the chairman of the Corporation Commission, which is the state's Public Utilities Commission. It's elected statewide. I was a Republican, as you know, back then.
Right.
Now I'm a Democrat. We fought for consumers. I was known as a consumer watchdog, protecting consumers against the power of big monopolies. We also regulated and prosecuted civil securities fraud at the Corporation Commission, and I oversaw a team of judges, and in fact was, in a sense, a judge myself on 2,700 different cases at the commission. So obviously have that experience, have been a member of the Arizona State Bar for more than 15 years. And I think that experience translates well to becoming the next Attorney General.
They translate. Now, the Attorney General, in this case, you're not necessarily in court, but we have had Attorney Generals in this state argue before the U.S. Supreme Court. Have you ever practiced law in a courtroom?
So in the sense, I have been in a courtroom in the sense that I was a judge on those 2,700 cases. And I think that's, really, it was played that judicial role as a corporation commissioner. I have not been a litigator, but I have practiced administrative law, and that is actually 70% of what the Attorney General's office does. This is, John, this is the top law firm, or the biggest law firm in the state of Arizona, and essentially the Attorney General is the managing partner of that law firm. I have supervised dozens of attorneys, unlike my opponent who has not. I have supervised judges, and unlike my opponent, I've also been in charge of a division of law enforcement. Our civil securities agents were badged and armed and braved, and I was responsible for them.
Let me ask you about this abortion issue. We are in kind of a legal limbo right now. What is the Attorney General's role in that issue? And how would you treat it, depending on outcome of what we see?
Well, John, this is a big difference between me and my opponent. My opponent has taken the position that he supports this insane 1864 abortion ban that would allow prosecutors to put doctors, nurses, and pharmacists in prison for up to 5 years. I have said that that law is unconstitutional, pursuant to Arizona's right to privacy, express right to privacy, John. Article 2, Section 8 of our Arizona Constitution protects a woman's right to choose and right to privacy. And I, on day one, this is important, will reverse Attorney General Brnovich's opinion that that 1864 law is constitutional, and I will say it's not. If
we end up with the 15-week law that the legislature passed, you are also the attorney for the legislature, are you not? As the attorney representing all the divisions of the state, you might have to represent them. Well, I've got to represent the state, and I've got to call balls and strikes, and I have to say whether or not a law is constitutional when I'm deciding whether to enforce it. So the 15-week would not be, you would not. I don't think it's constitutional, John. That 15-week ban. First of all, let's talk about what it is. It has no exceptions for rape or incest. In other words, if you are the victim of a rape or incest, you would be forced to carry to term. That's what that law does. But it also violates Article 2, Section 8 of the Arizona Constitution. Isn't this really come down to the individual county attorneys? And by constitutional authority, you really wouldn't dabble in that, would you? Well, here's how I would. Number one, I would say this law is unconstitutional. I would have these conversations with county attorneys. If they came to the view that they thought it was constitutional, I would provide them with my opinion that it's not. The Attorney General also does have what's called supervisory authority over county attorneys. And if it's necessary to protect the women of this state and to prevent the implementation of an 1864 law ban on abortion, John, I will invoke that How do you provision. Keep from being seen then as an activist attorney general? By supporting the Arizona Constitution. I don't think it's an activist attorney general. When the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and kicked it back to the states, John, they kicked it back to our Constitution. It just so happens that our founding fathers put an express right to privacy in our Constitution. Let me move on to fentanyl, because I know we're burning through time. Fentanyl pouring into the country. You've talked about fighting it, but how does that square with a border policy that some say Democrats have let the doors wide open? Here's the thing. I have talked about fentanyl, and I have done that a lot more, by the way, than my opponent has, and I have a plan for it. Number one, I agree. I think the federal government has not done a good job. Would you go at the Biden administration as Attorney General and say you have got to shut this thing down? Absolutely. I absolutely think that the Biden administration, as well as previous administrations, have dropped the ball. We have a surge going on at the border, and we need to address it. The fentanyl issue is particularly terrible. It's coming through our ports of entry. We need to deal with it. I think our police departments need additional resources. I'll fight for our police departments. I'll fight for our police getting additional resources and officers to tackle the fentanyl crisis. John, we're sitting on a $5 billion surplus in the state of Arizona. And this Republican governor and Republican AG have not spent it to fight that fentanyl crisis. Let me ask you about, you vowed to make climate change a corner piece of your administration. You've called it a top priority. You said you would appoint a climate director within the environmental enforcement section. You would expand the number of lawyers in the environmental enforcement section. How would a team of lawyers change trajectory on climate?
So here's really where I think the focus of the environmental division. So as you know, the Attorney General's office has an environmental division, created, by the way, by a Republican Attorney General, Grant Woods. And that, I think, division needs to work on water. And this is what I'm talking about. We have a serious drought happening in the state of Arizona. Our lakes are crashing. We just got a 21% cut in our Colorado River water supplies. And we have a state land department led by this governor and the current attorney general that just gave a sweetheart deal to a Saudi-owned corporation in La Paz County, allowing them to pump groundwater for free.
This is the alfalfa farm.
The alfalfa farms in La Paz County. We're going to cancel those leases on day one when I'm Attorney General. We cannot afford to be giving our water away for free to the Saudis.
Part of the clean energy you talk about in hopes of establishing, when you're talking about creating these team of lawyers in the environmental enforcement section, in the hope of establishing a requirement for our state's utilities of 100% clean energy standard. Right now, we're only 12%, as you know. How do we get there?
So I think the utilities are already planning to get there. So number one, they've all set very, very ambitious but reachable goals of getting to 100%.
Without the ratepayers getting absolutely pounded?
No, because clean energy today, John, is the cheapest source of energy. So over time.
With subsidy?
No, well, I mean, let's talk about,
with heavy subsidy.
No, I don't think so. Well, you and I will have to agree to disagree about that. But I think that that's where they're headed. And I believe in order to protect ratepayers, we need to keep going in that direction.
Could you look at California and say, okay, they've done what you're talking about doing, and the ratepayers are paying double for power than we're paying here per kilowatt hour?
And that's not because of clean energy. That's because of bad planning by the utilities, and it has really nothing to do with clean energy. But I think this is something that we are already doing well. I passed Arizona's first renewable energy standard. We did it in a responsible way, and I think it's really, really, really popular, even with your viewers. Arizona is in the top 5 states for rooftop solar energy, and that's because your viewers believe in energy independence.
Oh, I think they want to get there. The question is, how quick can you get there without impacting ratepayers, really hammering them?
Yeah,
and we're seeing it in Germany and other places that are trying this.
We are definitely not seeing it in Arizona, and I think we can get there.
Okay. What is the key issue for you in this race? Are we down to 2 minutes? Wow, quick.
It's fast, yeah.
What is the key issue in this race? We've talked about abortion.
Yeah.
What else would animate this race?
This race is also, John, about protecting American democracy. I don't think it's too strong to say that American democracy runs through the state of Arizona in 2022.
I've heard you say this.
My opponent has said that he would not have certified the 2020 election, and he wants to decertify it. My opponent has said...
He's not saying that as much now.
Not so much now, because he knows how unpopular and how outrageous it is. He is undemocratic. He essentially has said that he would have engaged in a coup in 2020. My opponent has also said he wants to lock up elections officials. That is insane, John. Our elections officials are great. We run terrific elections in the state of Arizona. And my opponent also wants to eliminate vote by mail. Do you vote by mail?
Yes, I do.
90% of us vote by mail. And, this is how we vote in the state of Arizona. I'll protect it.
Is there anything out there, a misconception that you want to clear up in the final seconds we've got here?
Not really. I think, a vote for Kris Mayes is a vote for restoring the core mission of the Attorney General's office. We need to prosecute consumer fraud again. We need to prosecute elder abuse. We need to tackle the fentanyl crisis, and we need to protect Arizona's water supplies. We need to put politics at the doorstep.
Kris Mayes, Democratic candidate for Arizona Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. We're back in a moment on Newsmaker Saturday.